The night is dark, and so are the secrets hidden within the hearts of those who've been wronged. Tonight, we dive deep into the shadows where justice isn't served by courts or karma, but by ordinary people pushed beyond their breaking point. These are true stories from the depths of Reddit, where revenge isn't just a dish served cold. It's served with calculated precision. Welcome to Revenge in the Shadows. I'm your host, and tonight we explore 3 chilling tales that will make you question everything you think you know about payback. So dim the lights, lock your doors, and prepare yourself for stories that prove sometimes the victim becomes the victor. Story 1. The Inheritance of Shadows. Our first tale comes from the depths of Reddit, and it's a story that will chill you to your very core. It's about family, betrayal, and a revenge so perfectly orchestrated that it took 5 years to complete. Sarah had always been the black sheep of the Hartwell family. While her siblings David and Rebecca lived their picture-perfect lives in suburban mansions, Sarah struggled as a single mother, working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. But family is family, right? At least that's what she believed, until the day her world crumbled. The call came on a Tuesday. Her father was dying. Cancer, they said. Had maybe weeks left. Sarah dropped everything, maxed out her credit cards, and flew across the country to be by his bedside. She held his hand through those final, agonizing days, while David and Rebecca were mysteriously too busy to visit more than once. With his dying breath, her father whispered, "Sarah, you were always my favorite. Take care of yourself, sweetheart." Those were the last words he ever spoke. But here's where our story takes its first sinister turn. At the reading of the will, Sarah discovered the crushing truth. Despite being the only child who cared for their father in his final days, despite sacrificing everything to be there, she received nothing. Nothing but a small box containing old photographs and her grandmother's ring. David inherited the house worth $800,000. Rebecca got the investment portfolio worth $1.2 million. And Sarah got a note that read, "Love doesn't pay bills. Your siblings have families to think about." But that wasn't even the worst part. As Sarah sat in that lawyer's office, tears streaming down her face, she overheard David whisper to Rebecca, "Good thing Dad never found out about Mom's real will." You see, their mother had died 3 years earlier, and apparently, she had left specific instructions that Sarah was to receive half of everything. But David and Rebecca had hidden that will, convinced their grief-stricken father that their mother died intestate, and manipulated the entire inheritance. Most people would have hired a lawyer. Most people would have fought it in court. But Sarah wasn't most people. Sarah had something her siblings didn't have: patience, intelligence, and absolutely nothing left to lose. For 5 years, Sarah played the long game. She smiled at family gatherings. She sent birthday cards. She played the role of the grateful younger sister who was just happy to have her family's love, all while she meticulously planned their destruction. First, she used her grandmother's ring as collateral for a small business loan. That business? A private investigation service specializing in insurance fraud. And wouldn't you know it, David had been running a very profitable scam with fake accident claims for the past decade. Sarah documented everything. Every fraudulent claim, every fake medical report, every forged document. But she didn't turn him in. Not yet. Next, she discovered that Rebecca's perfect marriage was built on lies. Her husband didn't know about the gambling addiction that had cost them over $200,000. Money that Rebecca had stolen from her own children's college funds and replaced with, you guessed it, money from their parents' inheritance. But Sarah's masterpiece was still to come. You see, both David and Rebecca had made a crucial mistake. They'd filed their taxes incorrectly, claiming their inheritance as gifts rather than inheritance, which meant they'd been evading taxes for years. The IRS frowns upon that sort of thing. On the 5th anniversary of their father's death, Sarah made 3 phone calls. The first was to the insurance fraud department, providing them with 5 years' worth of evidence against David. The second was to Rebecca's husband, along with a package containing bank statements and gambling receipts. The third was to the IRS. By noon that day, David was arrested. By evening, Rebecca was served with divorce papers. And by the end of the week, Both siblings owed more in fines, penalties, and legal fees than their inheritance was worth. But Sarah wasn't done. The hidden will their mother had made? Sarah had found it years ago, hidden in her father's belongings, that small box she'd inherited. She'd had it authenticated by 3 different legal experts. It was completely valid and legally binding. With her siblings now financially destroyed and facing criminal charges, Sarah finally revealed the will in court. The judge was, let's say, less than pleased with David and Rebecca's deception. Sarah didn't just get what her mother had originally left her. Due to the fraudulent concealment of the will, she was awarded punitive damages. The house, the investments, the life insurance payouts, everything. Plus interest, plus legal fees. Today, Sarah lives in her childhood home, worth now over $1.2 million. She's expanded her private investigation business into a multi-state operation. And every year on the anniversary of her father's death, she sends her siblings a card with a simple message. Love doesn't pay bills, but justice does. David is currently serving 3 to 5 years for insurance fraud. Rebecca lost everything in the divorce and is working at a convenience store to pay off her gambling debts. Sometimes the best revenge isn't hot and immediate. Sometimes it's a dish that's been aging in the darkness for years, getting more potent, more devastating with each passing day. Sarah didn't just get revenge. She got justice with interest, but our night of shadows has only just begun. Story 2. The Parking Lot. Predator, our second tale, comes from the concrete jungles of urban living, where something as simple as a parking space can unleash the darkest corners of human nature. This story reminds us that sometimes the most dangerous predators are hiding in plain sight. Meet Jennifer Chen, a 28-year-old software developer living in downtown Chicago. Jennifer worked from home most days, but her apartment building had limited parking, so she'd managed to secure one of the few spots in the building's small lot. She'd paid extra for it, signed a contract, had the paperwork. It was legally hers. But someone else had different ideas. Marcus Webb lived in the building next door. A man in his 50s with a sense of entitlement that could fill Lake Michigan, Marcus had decided that Jennifer's parking spot should be his. Why? Because he'd been living in the neighborhood longer. Because he drove a bigger car. Because he was a man, and she was just some little girl who should take the bus. At first, it started small. Marcus would park his massive SUV in her spot and claim it was an accident. When Jennifer would politely ask him to move, he'd take his time, make her wait 20 minutes, mumble about how she should be more patient with her elders. Then it escalated. Marcus began parking his car in a way that blocked Jennifer in, so she'd have to find him and ask permission to leave her own parking spot. When she complained to the building management, Marcus would charm the elderly landlord with stories about young people today and their attitudes. But Marcus made a critical error. He assumed Jennifer was just another pushover who would eventually give up and find somewhere else to park. He was very, very wrong. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday night. Jennifer had been at the hospital all day. Her mother was having surgery. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, and desperately needed to get home. But when she pulled into her parking lot, there was Marcus's SUV, deliberately parked across 2 spaces to ensure she couldn't park anywhere. Jennifer sat in her car for a moment, watching the rain pound against her windshield, and something inside her snapped. Not into rage, into something much more dangerous. Calculating fury. That night, Jennifer began her research. And what she discovered about Marcus Webb would have made a hardened detective's skin crawl. Marcus wasn't just an entitled neighbor. Marcus was a predator. Jennifer discovered that Marcus had been arrested 3 times in the past decade for harassment. Restraining orders from 2 different women, a complaint filed with his employer for inappropriate behavior toward female colleagues. And most disturbing of all, he'd been evicted from his previous apartment for harassing young female tenants. The parking spot wasn't about parking. It was about control. It was about finding a vulnerable target and systematically breaking down her boundaries until she either submitted or moved away. Jennifer realized she wasn't Marcus's first victim. She was just his latest. But unlike his previous targets, Jennifer had skills Marcus couldn't even imagine. She was a cybersecurity specialist, and she was about to give Marcus a masterclass in what happens when you pick the wrong target. Phase 1 was documentation. Jennifer installed a discrete security camera in her apartment window that had a perfect view of the parking lot. For 2 weeks, she documented every single instance of Marcus's harassment, not just toward her, but toward other female residents he'd been terrorizing. There was Mrs. Rodriguez on the 3rd floor, who Marcus had been accidentally bumping into in the hallway. There was Sarah, the college student, who Marcus had been following to her car at night, always with some excuse about making sure she got there safely. The pattern was clear. Marcus was escalating with multiple victims. Phase 2 was psychological warfare. Jennifer created a fake social media account and began engaging with Marcus online. She presented herself as a woman new to the city, looking for apartment recommendations. Marcus predictably took the bait. The conversations Jennifer recorded were damning. Marcus didn't just reveal his predatory behavior. He bragged about it. He talked about his system for identifying vulnerable women. He shared techniques for intimidation. He even mentioned several of his victims by name. Jennifer had him confessing to years of stalking and harassment. But Phase 3 was where Jennifer's true genius revealed itself. You see, Marcus worked for a major Chicago law firm, a firm that specialized in defending corporations against harassment lawsuits, a firm that had a very strict moral conduct clause in all employee contracts, a firm that would be very, very interested to learn what one of their associates had been doing in his spare time. Jennifer didn't just send Marcus's recorded confessions to his employer. She sent them to the Illinois State Bar Association. She sent them to every woman Marcus had mentioned by name, along with evidence of his pattern of behavior. She sent them to his landlord, his neighbors, his ex-wife, who, Jennifer discovered, had a restraining order against him. And then she sent everything to Detective Maria Santos at the Chicago Police Department, along with a perfectly organized case file that would make the FBI proud. But Jennifer saved the best for last. Remember how Marcus liked to block Jennifer's parking space? Well, Jennifer had discovered something interesting about Marcus's SUV. It was leased through his law firm as a company vehicle, and company vehicles aren't supposed to be used for personal harassment campaigns. Jennifer had also noticed that Marcus had been making some interesting modifications to his vehicle. Window tinting that exceeded legal limits, a hidden camera system pointed toward the apartment building, and most damning of all, a GPS tracking device that he'd been using to monitor the movements of female residents. All of this information went into Jennifer's final report, which she hand-delivered to the managing partner of Marcus's law firm on a Friday afternoon. By Monday morning, Marcus Webb was no longer employed. By Tuesday, he was being investigated by police. By Wednesday, 3 more women had come forward with harassment complaints, armed with Jennifer's evidence of his pattern of behavior. Marcus was arrested on charges of stalking, harassment, and violation of multiple restraining orders. During the search of his apartment, police found detailed files on dozens of women, photographs taken without consent, and evidence of cyberstalking going back over 5 years. The law firm? They were so mortified that one of their associates had been using company resources to stalk women that they offered to pay the legal fees for all of Marcus's victims. Pro bono. Marcus Webb is currently serving 2 to 4 years in state prison. He's been disbarred, evicted, and has restraining orders filed against him by 17 different women. And Jennifer? She still parks in her spot every day, but now she's also running a nonprofit organization that helps women document and report harassment. Her security system has been upgraded to monitor the entire building, and she's personally trained a dozen female residents in digital evidence gathering. The parking spot Marcus wanted so badly, it's been permanently reserved for Jennifer by the building management, along with a formal apology and a year of free parking. Sometimes a predator thinks they found the perfect victim, but sometimes the victim they choose is actually the one person who has the skills, the intelligence, and the sheer determination to end their reign of terror once and for all. Marcus picked the wrong woman to mess with, and now he has the rest of his life to think about that mistake. But the shadows still hold one more tale for us tonight. Story 3. The Substitute's Reckoning. Our final story takes us into the hallowed halls of education, where those entrusted with shaping young minds sometimes reveal themselves to be the very monsters children fear most. This tale is a reminder that sometimes justice arrives not from above, but from those who've been pushed too far. David Martinez had been a substitute teacher for 15 years. He'd worked in dozens of schools across 3 states, always moving on just before anyone could establish a pattern. David had perfected the art of being unremarkable, bland enough to blend in, charismatic enough to be trusted, and smart enough to avoid leaving evidence. But David had a secret that would have made parents lock their doors and never let their children out of sight. David Martinez was a hunter. Not of animals, of innocence. He specialized in targeting the vulnerable children, the ones from broken homes, the kids who were already struggling and wouldn't be believed if they spoke up. He'd identify these children within days of arriving at a new school, and then begin his campaign of psychological manipulation and abuse. His methods were sophisticated. A compliment here, a small gift there. You're so much smarter than the other kids think. You remind me of myself at your age. This will be our little secret. Classic grooming techniques, perfected over years of practice. And for 15 years, David Martinez had gotten away with it. Children who tried to report him were dismissed as troubled or attention-seeking. Parents who questioned his behavior were told they were overprotective. Administrators who might have investigated were charmed by his professional demeanor and stellar recommendations. David had hurt dozens of children, and he'd never faced a single consequence, until he arrived at Millfield Elementary School in suburban Oregon and made the mistake of targeting the wrong child. 8-year-old Emma Sullivan was exactly the type of victim David usually preferred. Shy, quiet, from a single-parent home, her mother Lisa worked double shifts as a nurse and relied on after-school care. Emma was often alone, often overlooked, and David saw her as perfect prey. What David didn't know was that Emma's mother wasn't just any nurse. Lisa Sullivan was a trauma nurse specializing in child abuse cases. She'd spent 10 years learning to recognize the signs, the patterns, the subtle changes that indicated a child was being victimized. And when Emma started having nightmares, when she suddenly became afraid of school, when she began exhibiting classic signs of abuse trauma, Lisa didn't dismiss it as just a phase. Lisa went hunting. Lisa's first step was Emma herself. Using techniques she'd learned from child psychologists, Lisa gently, patiently, helped Emma open up about what Mr. Martinez had been doing during their special tutoring sessions. What she heard made her blood run cold. David hadn't just been grooming Emma, he'd been systematically abusing her for weeks. And based on Emma's descriptions of other children David had shown special attention to, Emma wasn't his only victim at Millfield Elementary. That night, Lisa began the most important investigation of her life. She reached out to her contacts in law enforcement, child protective services, and hospital networks across 3 states. She was looking for a pattern, and what she found was worse than she'd imagined. David Martinez had left a trail of damaged children across 15 years and dozens of schools. But he'd been careful, never staying long enough for investigations to be completed, always moving before patterns could be established, always targeting children who were least likely to be believed. But Lisa had something David's previous victims hadn't had. A mother who was professionally trained to document abuse cases, and who had direct connections to law enforcement specializing in crimes against children. Lisa began building a case that would have impressed federal prosecutors. She contacted parents from David's previous schools, parents who'd had concerns dismissed, children who'd tried to report but weren't believed. She gathered medical records showing trauma patterns. She documented David's employment history and the suspicious timing of his departures. And then, she did something brilliant. Something that would ensure David could never hurt another child. Lisa realized that David's pattern of moving between schools meant he was crossing state lines. That made it a federal case. And federal investigators have resources that local school districts could never match. Lisa compiled everything she'd gathered into a professional case file and sent it directly to the FBI's Crimes Against Children unit. But she didn't stop there. She also sent copies to the Department of Education, the Teachers Union, and investigative journalists at 3 major newspapers. Within 48 hours, FBI agents were interviewing children at 4 different schools across 3 states. Within a week, they'd identified 17 victims. Within a month, they'd uncovered evidence of systematic abuse going back over a decade. David Martinez was arrested during his lunch break on a Tuesday. He was teaching a third-grade class when federal agents walked into his classroom and placed him in handcuffs in front of 30 shocked 8-year-olds. But Lisa still wasn't done. You see, Lisa had realized that David couldn't have operated for 15 years without some level of institutional negligence. School districts that failed to properly investigate complaints, administrators who ignored red flags, HR departments that didn't conduct proper background checks. Lisa hired one of the best civil rights attorneys in the country and filed lawsuits against 7 school districts, 3 state education departments, and 12 individual administrators who'd failed to protect children under their care. The legal discovery process revealed a pattern of systemic failure that shocked even seasoned investigators. Complaints that were buried, background checks that were never conducted, warning signs that were deliberately ignored. The story made national headlines. How one monster teacher abused children for 15 years became a catalyst for nationwide reforms in teacher screening and child protection protocols. David Martinez pled guilty to 23 federal charges including child sexual abuse, child exploitation, and transportation of minors for illegal sexual activity. He received 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. But the real victory wasn't his conviction. It was what happened next. The civil lawsuits resulted in a $47 million settlement, with most of the money going to establish a nationwide program for training teachers and administrators to recognize and report child abuse. The Emma Sullivan Child Protection Initiative has now been implemented in over 3,000 schools across the country. Lisa used her portion of the settlement to establish a nonprofit organization that provides counseling and legal support to child victims of abuse. Emma, now in high school, volunteers with the organization and has helped dozens of other children find the courage to speak up about their abuse. David Martinez thought he had found the perfect victim in a quiet, vulnerable 8-year-old girl. What he'd actually found was a child with a mother who had spent 10 years learning exactly how to hunt predators like him. Emma and Lisa didn't just get justice. They created a system that ensures David's crimes could never happen again. They turned their trauma into protection for thousands of other children. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who hide in plain sight, who wear the masks of trusted authority figures. But sometimes, those predators make the mistake of targeting a family that refuses to be silenced. David Martinez will spend the rest of his life in a maximum security prison, where child abusers receive a special kind of justice from their fellow inmates. Meanwhile, Emma is thriving. Lisa's program is saving children every day, and a monster who thought he was untouchable learned that some mothers are more dangerous than any nightmare. And so we close our journey through the shadows, where ordinary people pushed beyond their limits discovered that sometimes the most devastating revenge isn't hot and immediate. It's cold, calculated, and absolutely devastating. Sarah waited 5 years to destroy the siblings who stole her inheritance. And when she struck, she didn't just reclaim what was hers. She exposed years of fraud and corruption. Jennifer turned a parking lot bully's harassment campaign against him, revealing a predator who had been terrorizing women for years and ensuring he'd never hurt anyone again. And Lisa turned a mother's worst nightmare into a nationwide movement that has protected thousands of children from monsters hiding in plain sight. These stories remind us that justice doesn't always come from courts or karma. Sometimes it comes from those who refuse to be victims, who channel their pain into precision, their anger into action. The shadows hold many secrets, and revenge. Revenge is a dish that's best served with perfect timing, flawless execution, and the kind of patience that can only come from knowing that justice delayed is not justice denied. Thank you for joining me in the shadows tonight. Sleep well, and remember, you never know who might be watching, waiting, planning their perfect moment for revenge.